Hey dancers, welcome back to Broche Banter. I'm Julie, your host. In this week's episode, I have a fabulous guest, Rosy Pigott. You may remember her from season 1, episode 24. She and I go way back and we have so much in common about teaching adults. In fact, we teach a lot of the same students. She also does a lot of choreography for our festival participants, where she actually will choreograph for them remotely from where she lives in the UK, and they'll perform it with me in Florida. Today, Rosy and I talk about all things adult dance. We talk about how to build confidence, transform your mental limits, as well as your deeply ingrained movement patterns. We talk about, instead of limiting ourselves with labels such as I'm a bad turner or I can't balance, Rosy encourages us to challenge ourselves. She offers actionable advice on improving your balance and your core strength without having to spend hours and hours at the bar every single day. Small things done right and regularly make a really big difference. Rosy is soon to release a full course on balancing, and she's also putting on a really fun virtual Nutcracker this winter, so be sure to stay in touch with her and join her amazing programs. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Rosy. Welcome to the show, Rosy. I'm so excited to have you on Broche Banter today.
I'm very excited. I was trying to think, I think we did an episode when it was still lockdown, and it feels like we've all lived a whole nother lifetime since then. So it's really nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Wow, that is amazing that that's been so long, because it doesn't feel like much time has passed. We've kept in touch so much during this time.
No, it doesn't. I've
I feel
spoken to
like,
you since then.
yeah, I feel like we're going to pick up right back where we left off, because we chat all the time, all things adults. So I'm excited to chat with you today. We've got a couple of things we want to talk about, and of course the conversation will go where the conversation goes, as it goes when you're passionate about us the same thing. We both have something very much in common, which is that we love to work with the specific needs of adult dancers and the specific things that this audience needs to work on that are very special to it. One of which is getting off the bar, leaving the bar. Yeah. That's a huge deal for the audience. It's one thing to get your technique at the bar, but another thing to leave the bar. And then another huge thing is around performing for adults, and some things you've got in the works for the adults. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit first about getting off the bar for adult ballet dancers. Let's just dive in there, because there's a lot of meat there. First of all, why do you think it's so intimidating and scary and terrifying when you say take away the bars? What do you think goes on in that moment in our
Yeah, I think if you're in a studio setting, I think sometimes the place you have at the bar is kind of the safe spot. You always stand behind so and so and in front of someone else, and you've got your spot and it's fine. And that kind of change of setting can be a little bit nerve-wracking, or maybe you feel like you're being watched more by other people. And then I think in terms of if you're learning at home, I think sometimes the fear is, well, I've only just found my balance and my stability when I'm holding on. So what if I can't do it when I let go? What if I fall? What if I'm not as good as I thought I was when I let go? I think a lot of that can stop people from maybe going for things properly, sort of going in half-hearted and thinking, oh, well, I won't fully try because I'm not sure it's going to go very well. That sort of mentality, I think, holds people back. And with that, I think
there's even just in that first sentence, there's so much to dig into. In the studio setting, I wonder why people feel like they're being watched so much more in the center than at the bar, because in reality, you might be actually watched less in some ways because everyone's more, but maybe it's because we split into groups. But I definitely know that feeling of self-consciousness gets even worse in the center, maybe because you have to travel and therefore you might bump into people.
I think so.
There's so many different things.
So I did I did a recent in-person weekend of dance, and
that was the intensive. That was the intensive where people traveled in to meet you.
2 days, really great time, but it was quite a small, they're always quite small groups, really get to know everyone, everyone's really friendly, so there's no reason to kind of assume people would be judging you. But as soon as I was okay, we're going to go from the corner, why don't we go in threes or something, you could see this sort of unspoken competition of who was going to go first, because nobody really wanted it to be them. And I think that sort of hesitation can stop you from really trying. And I actually was thinking recently about when I was in full-time training, there was a girl who I always really found her approach really interesting, and I'd wish that I could have been more like that at that age, actually, because she would always put herself first. and she would always go with the person at that time who was very much the class favorite. And I always like really respected the fact that she would be like, yes, I'm going to go first. I'm going to go with this person who I know is better than me. And I'm going to really push myself to do that. And I think that approach often has better results than maybe putting yourself near the back because you're not sure. What if I make a mistake? I don't want to go with someone who's way better than me because, you know, I'm going to look terrible, or all of those kind of like negative things. I definitely see that when it comes to like traveling across the floor. And I think, you know, I can just really remember this one person who I trained with who was always willing to kind of go first, even if it wasn't their like favorite subject, for example.
That takes so much guts, especially because depending on if it's a new setting or you know the teacher or the other students, sometimes you do get some shade if you go first and you didn't do it right. Like sometimes you do get,
Yeah.
sometimes the teacher does give you a pretty hard time if you go first and you didn't get it right. Like that definitely does happen. I mean, there's I think that's happened to us all where you've gone first and you're like, I think I have it, but then you mess it up and you get a bit of flack from the teacher or from the other students, or an eye roll from the person who goes with you to bump into you. Like there can be some, you have to, you know, feel okay with yourself even when you get into those embarrassing moments. So it definitely takes a lot of guts. And then to just on the outside of that be like, if something does go wrong, like you're still fine, you're still welcome in that class, you should still come back next time. Like that's
100%.
it can be a tough, it can honestly be a dicey moment.
And I think you know, I was like, I don't know, 17 or something at this point in time. And so I think to sort of have that approach at that age, I kind of recognized that that was quite unique. And I think I was able to replicate that in some classes, like you say, where I kind of was aware that the teacher maybe liked me, or I felt like it wasn't going to be the end of the world if I did make a mistake, but I definitely wasn't as kind of confident about it, like in every setting. And I think actually that ability to just go for it is a big limiting factor in like especially things like turns or like more tricky, more advanced steps. Like if you can't go for it 100%, your body and your muscles aren't going to go for 100% either. And then it's maybe not going to work out how you want. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the kind of maybe psychological limitation is sometimes bigger in adults than what I see in children. And I definitely remember, you know, getting my first pair of point shoes and wanting to go in for things and not really being that scared because I was quite young and I didn't think about it like that. So I think there is that added layer of kind of, you know, risk assessing that maybe adults do that on the whole younger students probably don't.
Yeah, young people are not exactly known for their amazing risk assessment abilities.
Exactly. Whereas
overall.
I think adults can go like too far the other way, you know, like, oh, well, I can't go to that pirouette, I can't try that. Like, you know, I didn't get that balance before perfect, so I can't try this. Like, you're almost kind of too far the other way sometimes where you're not going to go for it because, you know, you're not 120% satisfied with the stuff you already did.
Yeah, right. There's two kind of interesting conflating pieces there, which is that it wasn't like this idea that it wasn't perfect, therefore I can't try the next harder thing yet because that thing wasn't perfect. And then there's also physical fear of not understanding your own body's limitations, or not feeling in control of your own body. Like as you age and you sort of come to a body, let's say you haven't exercised in some decades and you come to ballet as kind of your first regular exercise form, it's like you're living in a different body than the last time you maybe did some of these different things. Yes. So you're getting to know a new machine that you're living in and that you're working with.
Yeah.
So there's both of those factors, the perfectionism issue, which is just like, am I allowed to move on before I'm 100% perfect? And also, what if I get hurt? Like, what can my body handle? I don't even know what my body can handle. What if it's not safe for me? Like those are, I think, two really big questions.
Yeah, and I think like you might not know what your body can handle until you try. Especially like I've had some students come to me who are maybe recently become parents for the first time, so their body feels different, they've changed, they're perhaps less strong than they were, and they might not know what the limit is at that point in time, and you kind of have to find out. Like that is the only way to find out, is to give things a go within reason. And you're saying there, like, you know, somebody who maybe hasn't done something physical in 3 decades then decides to take up something new. of course you're going to feel completely different than the last time that you did it. And there was a you may have seen it, I don't know how far these things travel, but there is a program here that was initially like piloted by the English National Ballet, which was about using dance to help people with Parkinson's disease.
Yes, I heard about this.
Right. So obviously, like, we recognize on some level that dancing is good for you, irrespective of age, irrespective of like disability, illness, all of those things, like that it's useful for you. But then at the same time, we like automatically place a limit on what you can try and do. So those things kind of don't really line up for me. I'm like, okay, do we think it's great and everyone should do it or not? Because those are not the, like they're not the same.
Yeah, that's a great point. Does it have health benefits or is it inherently dangerous? Which is it?
Yes, like let's pick, because obviously if you are, with the Parkinson's example, especially depending on how far that has progressed, there may be very serious limitations to what you can do. But the benefits of moving and dancing and listening to music and all of those things can have a really positive effect on it. So if we can affect something like that, which is, if we think about like our proprioception, our balance, our stability, all of those things that are really severely impacted in a very life-changing way, if moving your body can benefit those things in that demographic, then the potential for improvement in a sort of average healthy body, let's say, is probably much greater than people think.
Yep.
Or I think it is anyway. But
yeah, well, it's a great point, and I think we both see on a regular daily basis people improving, getting stronger, working on their balance, being able to do things that they didn't used to be able to do. I think we see that much more often than someone is like getting a lifelong debilitating injury from dancing. Like we see it much more frequently.
Yes, I see much more of
the
that,
progression.
100%. Yeah.
I think balance is such an interesting point that you made there, because we all have, I'm sure we've all experienced somebody in our life who's older who had a bad fall in their late stage years and then had so many health complications from that. Fall risk is huge, 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 huge amongst older humans. And to help people improve their balance, to help them be able to stand on one leg, to shift their weight quickly, to measure their health in terms of their balance, that's huge. And something like ballet, where you can actually do it in a safe environment, holding on to the bar to build stability, right? Like not every dance class has that, where they can actually feel comfortable holding on to something. You can actually hold on to something, improve yourself to the point where you do feel comfortable standing in the center on one leg. Like that's actually, like you said, a life-changing thing where it can actually improve the quality of your life for many years.
Yeah, exactly. And I've noticed, and you may have noticed the same or felt it in your own body, that some people seem to come to dance maybe with no prior experience and are better at balancing than others.
Yep.
Or have a better natural sense of axis and turning. And I kind of like see this trend. I'm like, some people it clicks with, some people it takes absolutely ages to crack that thing. And I started looking into like, well, why is that? Because on paper, these two people could be very similar. They could be a similar age. They could be a similar level of fitness. They could be all these things. But one of them can stand in retiré at the bar and take their hand off, no problem. And the other one is like 0.1 seconds and we're down. And there was a study, and I can't off the top of my head remember which university it was. I think it was the University of Georgia, that kind of evidence that long-term ballet training benefited your balance and stability when walking, right? So even if we're struggling to balance in a classical position, if you're training regularly and you do that for a long period of time, your balance in your general life is almost definitely going to be positively impacted. So, you are still improving your balance, even if you cannot notice it, because the thing you are trying to balance in is very difficult.
I see. So even if you can't hold your retiré for 10 seconds without the ballet bar, you're still developing a sense of balance through the process.
Yes.
Perhaps it will take you many more years for it to show up in the retiré, but it's going to show up in your regular life sooner. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Exactly. So I think the kind of overall summary of it was that sort of long-term ballet training eventually changes like how our nervous system perceives what we're doing and how the muscles are used to balancing, so how good they are at restabilizing and how good they are at obviously if you get stronger you're able to balance maybe in more elaborate positions, but you're sort of impacting your general sense of balance anyway, even if it doesn't show up immediately in that one thing that you would really like it to. So,
why does ballet have that impact more than the other dance styles? Like, what's it about ballet specifically that's giving that benefit, do you think?
I'm not sure if it's been like directly compared, like if
I
there's
see.
been exact study for, say, I don't know, tango or something, like if they've directly compared it. And I would imagine that like any sort of coordinated regular movement would have a positive impact. I guess the thing that is very specific about ballet is the complexity of some of the ways that you're balancing, and also the way that when we transfer our weight isn't always the same. So I could transfer through a plie, I could transfer through straight legs, I could go from a fondue to a demi point, I could go on to point, I could go quickly, slowly, right, left. That sort of variety is, builds your body's repertoire of like positions you can stabilize in and what feels okay.
All of those things to a beginner dancer seem very inconsequential, and that they should be very easy and that they look very simple, but they're actually pretty foundational and challenging skills to develop, not only with your feet facing front, but with your feet facing sideways. What makes it so much more difficult than it seems, right? Like, to a master, it looks so easeful and so graceful and so light on their feet. But to a new person learning a ballet walk, learning how to do a tanlier properly, learning how to do any of these steps is actually not really inconsequential. Yeah. Like, what do you think makes it so difficult, and how do you go about working with people on that?
I think part of the fact is that maybe when they've watched it, people do make it look easy. So, that sort of perception is then like, oh, well, but, they're making that look so simple. So why am I finding it so difficult? I think when it comes to working on how people are finding their shifting of weight or their balance, I always start by finding whatever the baseline is. So can we balance on one foot on a flat foot in parallel? Great. Okay. Can we do that in turnout? Can we do that with a bent supporting knee? Can we do it with a straight supporting knee? Can we do it with one eye shut? Can we do it with both eyes shut? Like, where is the limit of what we can do right now? Because if you go from zero and then you try and balance in a piqué arabesque and you can't do it, then that's sort of unsurprising. I think it's also like, we often see a lot of dancers are hypermobile, so we see these balances happening that are really amazing and wonderful, but the reality is that a lot of people who do have hypermobility syndrome also have less joint proprioception, so the ability to find your balance is going to be more difficult. Not impossible, because clearly people are doing it, but that is an added layer. So if you are a beginner and you're hypermobile, you are starting off in some ways like at an advantage, let's say, with how the line might look, say, with the feet, but you're at a disadvantage potentially in the fact that you probably don't have the same proprioception as somebody else right now. And proprioception is something that I think is more fundamental to ballet than we realize. I feel like it's not something we necessarily train, because we're often doing similar movements in a similar pattern, in a similar order. And the proprioception is like your body's awareness of where you are in space and your balance when you're not looking. So, and actually it's very tempting as a beginner to say, do your tendus and look at your foot, because you want to see, am I stretching it? Am I sickling? Am I doing what I was just told to do? And that is helpful, but you're not building your body's ability to do it without you looking at it. Right. And so I think probably if you've ever taken a class with me ever, we've stood on one leg with our eyes shut. And I'm not going to stop doing it, because it's really helpful. And I do it pretty much at the start of every class that I give for anyone of any level. We shut our eyes and balance at some point, because that's the real golden test, right? Let's say if I stand on one leg on a flat foot and I shut my eyes and I go to even a parallel retiré, let's say. If after 5 seconds I've come out of that, but my expectation is that I'm going to stand on releve in a retiré position, take my hand off the bar and hold it for 30 seconds, I'm going to be disappointed when it comes to that moment. So I sometimes think we haven't really tested the steps before, before we try the thing that we can't do and then think, oh, well, I'm just rubbish at that. Like, you know, every time I take my hand off the bar, I just fall. Like every time I try, it goes wrong. And I get that. It's really annoying. Like, you know, like you want to be able to do it, but I think there's a lot of like merit in maybe doing things that are slightly less challenging to build up the confidence in your own body that you can do it.
Well, and I think one of the issues there is that often the ballet steps are given as if they are the building block or that they are the beginning, and so it's not always clear that there's actually these skills that come beforehand, which often, you know, often kids are getting, even just in pre-ballet, they're playing around, they're jumping around, they're skipping around, they're standing on one leg, they're standing on the other leg. But when you're starting as an adult and you don't play around with scarves and with, you know, dancing around to music, you're not getting these proprioceptive, you're not getting these coordination trainings. You're just starting off at the bar and saying like retiré on demi point is the foundational step one, but it's like not. If you were like a kid,
10 steps before that.
Yeah, if you were a kid learning ages 4 to 8, you weren't doing that. You were doing, you know, some other things. But it's just as an adult, we don't have that like quote unquote pre-ballet, and so it looks like ballet is the beginning, but actually, like your life leading up to it wasn't really pre-ballet. Like your life living up was not, but we just kind of assume that they don't need it or whatever reason they don't. I don't know why exactly we skip it for adults, but it's just not a part of it. And so you think, well, retiré balance is the beginning and I can't do it, therefore I can't do ballet. But actually there's all these other steps before you even get there that we work on in class, that we work on to actually get your body there.
And I've seen like, you know, posts where you've done before where it's like standing still in ballet is really hard. Yes, it is, you know, on 2 flat feet, like before you've even added in your arms, demi point, taking a leg off, before you've done any of that bit's hard. And so I think when it comes to balance, I think it's good to keep trying those things that you want to be able to do, because actually if you make them big and scary and impossible and never give them a go, that sort of puts them on a pedestal of, well, you know, that's a write-off for me. But you also need to figure out why you can't balance, and that is the key. And I think even when I was a very young dancer, I remember being, I don't know, maybe 14 or something, getting a new teacher and my teacher saying to this new teacher, oh, Rosie's really good at correcting herself. And that's probably because I spent like hours in our basement with a mirror doing things to figure out what was wrong with them and how I could fix them. And that skill doesn't happen when you first start. Nobody inherently has that ability as a beginner. And so you might just feel like you try the same balance 10 times, it worked on one of them, the other 9 it completely didn't work, and you have no idea why. And the same is true of pirouettes. People say, oh, but I tried loads and it just doesn't work, or it happens too quickly and you can't identify why. So an element, I'm like, as I'm forming like a balance course for adults that they can kind of drop into when they want to, one of the elements is like, well, what am I doing wrong? How can I figure out why I can't do this? Rather than just being like, well, you know, tried, failed, that's that, job done.
Right. There's so much there in between the black and white. Like I always tell people, where you fall is all you need to know. You have to always look at where you fell. What happened? Which way did you fall? Why did you fall the way? Could you fall the other direction? Can you fall anywhere on purpose? Like, are you able to fall on purpose, or is it always accidental? Like there's so much experimenting that has to go into balance, and nobody can tell you. Like your teacher can definitely help you and give you tools and stuff, but your teacher cannot feel. Like your teacher can't feel your own body and can't develop a sense of balance for you. Like it's one of those things that takes a lot of observing, trying something else, experiment this way, experiment that way, building this, building that. It takes a lot of time.
Like you say, can you actually even choose where you're falling, or is it literally like every time it just happens? I don't know what's going on. So I think a good place to start is like the direction you're falling. What feels like it wobbles first? Does it feel like your ankle moves, or does it feel like your torso moves? The other thing I think that sometimes people maybe haven't thought about is, am I strong enough to hold this position? Because again, we look at something and think it's easy. It actually takes a huge amount of strength, but we're not seeing that. Right. So actually, you know, if I can't say go demi point in first position and hold that for 20 seconds, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that on one foot. And sometimes that can be to do with strength, particularly the unsung hero here, the core strength.
And that's the most invisible. No one can see it because
no
when
one
you have
can see
it,
that.
nothing
But
happens.
the amount of times that people will say, oh, you know, my teacher always shouts, use your core. I mean, I get it, but it's kind of meaningless unless somebody knows how. How do you use your core?
Right.
And I think it takes a long time for people to find that feeling and be able to replicate it. Yeah. I think the closest feeling that I sometimes suggest to people is like when you're doing the plank or something like that, where it's a full body engagement. A balance is a full body engagement.
Yep.
And sometimes people are not using their full body. They're worrying about their demi point. They're worrying about how high their heel is and whether their leg is straight. And we've not added anything else on top of that.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, they often feel like if they do use their whole body, that they will look strained and that it will be incorrect. Therefore, because when they see other people balancing, it looks like nothing's happening. Yeah. They look relaxed. And the thing about core strength, which I think is so odd to explain, is that when you have it, it will look like nothing is happening. Like,
yes,
the result of core strength is that you look like you're doing
more relaxed.
Yeah, you look relaxed because you're not having to strain the wrong things. You're not having to strain your neck because your spine isn't being supported. You're not having to strain your shoulders because your spine isn't supported. You're not having to squeeze your glutes because your spine isn't supported. Like you're not having, so it's like the weirdest thing, because the result of an extremely strong core is that you just look still.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, really. But I think
the less still you look, the weaker the core. Like this
and
is.
I remember being told at various times, like, you know, you need to strengthen your core, you need to use your core, and then that not really being followed up with something I could actually do.
Yeah.
Because the reality was that my core wasn't weak. Like, we did genuinely a 5-minute plank every morning. So, you know, you wouldn't have been making it through that alive had you not been recruiting some core muscles for that part. But I didn't know how to use it at those moments when I needed it at that moment in time. And so it is, you know, maybe working on the core strength. There's then the added layer of having to do it in a balletic context, which is maybe like a bit of a hurdle for people. Yeah. But something that I've been getting people to do recently, which seems to be like challenging but popular, is to find a position that you're comfortable with. Maybe that's a parallel position or a first position, rising up on demi point, and then just voluntarily moving your body, like doing a crunch, doing a side crunch and returning. How far can I go and how strong are those muscles that I can pull myself back to center? Mm-hmm. When does it tip over the edge to me falling? And obviously everyone's limit is different. As a beginner, you often do kind of spend a lot of time at the bar, and then you have the comfort of holding on. And so maybe you're not using your core in the way that you should be because you're holding on. And then suddenly you have to let go and you really need it. And you haven't practiced using those muscles. You haven't used them when you were doing the pliés. You haven't used them when you were doing the tendus. And now you're demanding like a lot of them and you're not quite ready to do it. So I think it's also good to take, you know, the strength back into those easy movements. You know, am I using those muscles to support my spine and support my body even when my hand's on the bar? Because if you're really struggling with your balance, the answer to that is probably no.
Yep.
I'd give a good guess that it's no.
Yeah, and there's so many factors here too with your core, which is like how tight different parts of your spine are. Like, what positions are you able to hold your spine in, or where do you get stuck from other tightnesses, right? Like if your pelvis is being pulled in a certain direction, or you have some imbalances, or you have a lifelong scoliosis you've been working with, or you have some or even, I mean, a big one is, of course, coming back from C-section. Dancers, you know, need the rehabilitation and the relearning of basically how to use their body. So there's so many additional factors when it comes to how do you use your core when you're coming at it from later in life versus earlier, right before when you're a kid. So if you're learning this for the first time when you're an adult, it can be like, it can take quite some time to understand these muscles, because they don't burn like your quads. If you do a wall sit for 20 seconds,
you know burn.
You know about it. If you're holding your groceries, like, you know about it in your bicep. Like if you're if you're doing these movements, you can feel it, right? But your core doesn't really make you sweat. I mean, it can, but it doesn't really have a big sweaty or cardio or burning sensation. It's a much more subtle, I think, and nuanced feeling, which I think can be very hard to describe because it's not really like squeezing your core. I hear that word and it's like squeeze your core. Well, what does that mean exactly? Or like suck in or pull up or push down or whatever. It's just very interesting. It's such a subtle movement that I think takes some time to acquire the taste for it.
I think sometimes those cues are well-intentioned but not helpful.
Yeah.
So squeeze your core, or, like all of those things, like they only really mean anything if you truly understand how that part of your body works. Otherwise, you're just guessing. You're trying to suck in, or you're trying to be really tense, or, you're thinking, oh, I thought I was already using my core. Apparently I'm not. Like, it can be quite confusing. So I think sometimes it's good just to test it out yourself and figure out whether you are using your core. So, how can you find some awareness of like the front of your body and the back of your body when you do a demi-plie, right? Because if you can find that feeling's going to look like my body feels engaged but not tight. I feel like my legs and my hips are moving almost independently. And I feel like I'm not being really tempted to tip my body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm held, not squeezed, I think would be my explanation.
Now, when it comes to your whole balancing program that you're developing, what's your framework for that? Is it barre, floor, center? What's your kind of framework and overall way that you approach it, building it from the ground up?
I've included like a little bit more detail about some of the studies that I've looked at about like proprioception and balance and those kinds of things. And then some examples of very specific ways that you can figure out if you're using those muscles. Okay, so can I test my own core strength in a way that's relevant for ballet? Can I test my own calf strength in a way that's relevant for ballet? Like all of those little things that might add up. Then a kind of little troubleshooting arena. And then the hope is that those little cues and some strengthening kind of activities will then allow a little bit more insight into that person's balance. So then when they do go and take class, they can be a little bit more aware and maybe be better at figuring out why it went wrong. Because I think that just not being able to do it and being frustrated about it kind of doesn't help you. Like, it's just really annoying, and you just then decide that you're someone who can't balance. Well, my balance is terrible, I can't do that. Rather than having a little, troubleshooting guide, which is, I kind of hope, what's going to be made here. And then you can figure it out. The primary aim really is that people can troubleshoot what's going on with their own balance, and then to have some kind of insight into what might help them with that. And obviously, if we take core strengthening as an example, there are a billion ways to strengthen your core. And so the suggestions that I'm going to give are just the ones that I have seen work the most and are the easiest to kind of implement, because I think often the problem is, especially online, when everything is in a 15-second reel. I love reels. Some of them are great, but some of them are also quite complex. So you'll be seeing an exercise that is being done really well by the person in the video, but actually, unless you can be really sure that you're executing that well on your own, it might be a bit of a waste of time. So I've gone for, really clear, easy to follow. I'm going to know if I'm doing this right or wrong. And then you can feel confident that you will be developing your strength a little bit. And again, just like you were saying there, like, other tightnesses and weaknesses can also have an impact. And again, if you're hypermobile, if you have an extremely flexible back, it's highly probable that you've spent a lot of your time here and the core is weaker because you not used it in the same way as someone whose spine has a more gentle curve. Right.
For the listening audience, Rosie's just showing the lower back has probably been tilted forward with an extra lower back curve, just the hand motion there. Exactly. If you're hypermobile, you probably have spent a lot of time with your pelvis tilted forward, locking back in your knees, pushing into that lower back versus someone who has spent more time with a gentler lower back curve.
Yeah, and those things, especially if you come to something later in life, if you've been walking around like that for 30 years or
Yeah.
40 years or more, then that movement pattern is more ingrained, the tightness and weaknesses are more ingrained,
Right.
the lack of strength in certain area and loads of strength in the other area is more ingrained. So it's maybe a little bit more difficult to get used to that new feeling because it will feel less familiar.
And I think that is not to say that it's impossible to do, but it's just going to feel wrong for a while. Like
Yeah.
it's going to feel like you're tucking your pelvis under for a while. It's going to like you don't want to go past neutral tucking under, but for someone who's used to having that extreme lower
Yes.
back curve, it will feel very strange. And to become the faster you can become, I think the faster you can become okay with that strange feeling and know that you're still safe and stable and like you said in your course that you can troubleshoot what's going on in these different scenarios. I think the faster you can feel confident there, but it's really about getting used to these
Yeah,
odd
feeling a
feelings,
bit weird.
feeling a bit
Yeah.
weird, feeling off. And then you have to look and say, okay, no, that's what's straight. You have to retrain your body to think what straight is. Like, okay, straight is when I feel this.
Yeah,
Straight is when I feel like you have to retrain your mind to what the sensations feel like.
exactly. And I mean, I will say like some of those patterns are definitely present in children too. Like you see children who naturally stand very arched or who naturally sickle or whatever. But they're less sort of set in their ways, in their physical ways at
Right.
least. And that can be difficult for people, but you can also tackle that in very small ways. So actually, if you're standing in a queue to pay for petrol or something, can you just, pay attention to how you're standing? Because the chances are you're going to default to whatever your normal is. And that's an opportunity there for you to actually spend an extra 60 seconds standing properly or more neutrally.
Right.
And those moments really add up because actually, if let's say you take a class that's an hour and you do that 2 times a week, all those other moments in the day, you're probably standing in your normal pattern. So if you can correct yourself a little more often in your normal life, I think that can have quite a big impact in your dancing.
Yeah, that's huge. So we'll keep in touch. I'll have links in the description with Rosy's info. You can keep in touch when that balance course is released because it's going to be really great. And a huge part of building confidence away from the bar is not worrying that you're going to fall over and trusting yourself to go from one leg to the other. So stay in touch with Rosy. That course will be coming out soon. And I think there's a big part of here, which is kind of the other part that's I know very near and dear to you is if you want to perform, balancing on stage is like a whole other thing, right? Like being able to stand on stage with the lights and everything is totally changed. Like talk about a proprioceptive challenge. You're walking onto a black stage, lights in your eyes, and performing is so, so different with your balance. Just a quick plug, you're doing Rosy's doing a really cool virtual Nutcracker this year where you get to learn her original Nutcracker choreography and rehearse with her over Zoom and then put together.
So fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. Going to put together a little recital video together of everyone's clips that you've done. So get in touch with Rosy if you want to be a part of that rehearsals. If you're listening to this when it comes out, we'll be starting approximately November. So get in there. You don't have to worry about the stage lights for this home performance.
You don't, but it is
but
true.
if you do come to the stage, like you join at the festival or you join another performance, the lights change your balance a lot, don't they, Rosy?
They really do. And I think also like just being a bit nervous can maybe make you feel a little more unsteady or, like you're a little less focused. And those things can all affect it. And that's why if you can make it very much a day-to-day thing that you do and to work on those things when you're doing the things you do more often, whether that's doing a plie exercise every day or walking down the street or both, then you've got more sort of physical evidence for your body to rely on when you are a little bit nervous or when you try something new or when you try something and it doesn't quite work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know if for people who come and join us at the festival here in Florida, I know personally, whenever I travel on an airplane or in a long car ride, I get vertigo and I can't balance on one leg for a couple of days after a big trip or a big travel. So even traveling to perform, I always always admire dancers who go on tour and they fly and then perform like right away that day when they get off the plane or whatever. It's just incredible. You'd have to do so much work on your balance because traveling affects at the different altitudes, the hydration affects the balance. I mean, all of this stuff affects how your internal body feels and works. So like you said, building up that evidence really helps you feel comfortable in these different scenarios, like that you don't feel worried that you're going to fall over the second you try to get onto one leg.
I think if like, you know, you've only ever done a move correctly like 50% of the time you've done it, or your balance only works out 50% of the time you've done it, then you try something more difficult, you're kind of naturally going to be hesitant because you haven't really proven to yourself that it's going to work out and you can do it. So it's good to sort of, you know, also have some moderate steps. I'm comparing this to my dogs. We moved house, I'm training them to be alone here, and sometimes I will do like these 2-minute little standing outside just to build up like positive evidence, you know, like, okay, tick, we did that today. So you can do that with your ballet training as well. You can do something that is maybe easier for you. Let's say we can do double pirouettes, do some really good singles, build that body of evidence that you can nail that. And then actually maybe when you go for that too, you're more confident about it. Those like before steps often get skipped once we start doing more advanced things. Like it's really tempting to be like, oh, well, we won't balance now, we'll go straight for the turn because we can. But those other easier skills are still just as important. Like you still need to give that sort of positive reminder to yourself. You need an easy win, basically. You know, you need an easy win to be like, tick, yes, we made that, it was great, okay, next thing, now I'm ready for something else.
Well, I know you're very passionate about encouraging people that even if you have only a very short period of time, you can still make a lot of progress.
Yes, you can. I really do believe this. I don't think, I mean, if you have the luxury of time and you're able to do a lot every day, that's absolutely amazing. And I think it can make your progress faster, definitely. But you don't need a lot of time to do something that's very productive, and also to do it in a way that is very progressive for you, that is like trying to correct you often as you're going along, you know? Like I think a plie exercise done well is kind of better than maybe a whole bar that's done very haphazard with not very much muscle engagement, getting the combinations wrong, all that stuff. Like is quality. I think quality, not quantity, is kind of, you know, that's how I go.
Yeah, and I think so much of our technique is built up before rond de jambe.
Yes.
Until rond de jambe. Like the rest of it is the cherry on top. Whatever you had on the ground is going to see if you can apply it off the air. But like plie sur rond de jambe is like mostly how you move your body.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to do those bigger things if those, you know, first few exercises are, you know, not really strong. You're going to find difficulty in the more advanced things if you haven't really got the, you know, just how you use your feet, for example. Like those things matter, you know?
Yeah, they matter a lot. I'm curious, Rose, if you have any last little pieces that you want to make sure to leave our listeners with about, you know, either about balance or about improving ballet or about performing or anything. Yeah, anything that's important to you.
If you are maybe frustrated about some element of dance right now, whether that's balancing or turning or flexibility or whatever it is, would just be to like approach it with a small commitment. Like, can I do 2 more minutes a day than I'm doing now? And actually that really adds up. You know, if you do 5 minutes a day on something, you know, across 7 days a week, that's 35 minutes. So you've already done like over 2 hours extra on it in a month. Like that's a lot. And I think sometimes people feel like, well, I don't have the time to go to class every day, so I'm never going to get better. And I think that's true for everything. If you want to challenge yourself, if you want to perform, if you want to learn longer things, then you should. And, you know, like there's the festival now, and I'm doing a virtual Nutcracker, and there are more and more things that are popping up to give people that platform to do the more artistic side of things. And I think that's just as important as the technical stuff.
Yeah, it supports you. And I think when it comes to 5 minutes, it's like, I think it sounds like 5 minutes isn't that much, but like I guarantee you, if you do a plank for 5 minutes, you'll see that at 5 minutes is
you will be tired. Yeah,
it's a very like 5 minutes is way too long for a plank, and it is
exactly.
It's like literally proof that it's plenty of time for the right type of exercise. For imagine balancing on one leg for 2.5 minutes per leg, hugely beneficial, like massively beneficial to even just stand on one leg for 2.5 minutes and switch and stand on the other leg for 2.5 minutes. Huge benefits.
Yeah, and when you add that up over time, like you've spent hours more doing it than you would have done just from those few minutes. I think is, like don't limit how much progress you think you can make based on like your time availability. Like I think if you can do some quality practice, you can make a lot of improvement on whatever area that is. I
Right.
think it's maybe a good excuse in our heads, but if you do really want to improve, then you can. That opportunity is available to you, even if it is 2 minutes at a time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rosy, so much for being here. I'm going to have all the links to everything that Rosy's got for you guys in the description. Stay in touch with her. She puts out lots of great ballet content and philosophy. And like we were talking about, these great opportunities with the balance course and the virtual Nutcracker. So stay in touch with Rosy. And thank you so much for being here today and for supporting the whole community.
Again.
Yeah, super great to chat with you.
And for Margot, who is.
Hi, cutie pie.
Yeah, Margot's going to have a little wave too.
Bye. Thank you so much, Rosy. All right, dancers, that was the episode with Rosy. I hope you had a really great time getting to listen to her. I hope you are inspired and motivated to squeeze in a few minutes of your ballet practice here and there. Be sure to get in touch with Rosy to be the first to know when she releases her balance course, as well as to be a part of her virtual Nutcracker this holiday season. I have all of Rosy's contact information down in the show notes. I'll be back in your ears next week with another amazing episode, and until then, I wish you very happy dancing.